Good morning. Before we move forward in our Revelation study, I feel that it's very important to explain something that I've not really had the time or the opportunity to really explain. How many times have we read the passage that was just read, a section of Matthew 24 or Luke 21 or Mark 13, famously called the Olivet Discourse? And when we read that, we wonder, what exactly is it talking about? I would encourage you on your own time, read the gospel accounts. I would also encourage you to read the entire book of Acts to further understand just how vast the persecution was of the Messiah's followers by their own Jewish brothers and sisters. Throughout the book, we see the Jewish religious leaders, and I would call them their minions, causing trouble, arresting, persecuting, killing, and reporting Christians to Roman authorities was a daily thing. It was no mystery that judgment was going to come, and that judgment was going to come upon Israel for the rejection of their Messiah, the Son of God. When Israel would rebel against God and reject His prophets in the Old Testament scriptures, what was always the result? By who? Who would He use? Other nations. Assyria, Philistia, Babylon, Persia, Rome. These are just several of the many that God used to carry out swift and harsh judgment on the Israelites in their time of abandonment. In all these instances that I used, the people would reject God, disobey Him, mingle with other nations, worship their gods, institute their practices and rituals, and as a result, God would permit other nations to step in and oppress. And what was happening during the time of Rome is that you had a lot, and I can't begin to tell you how much corruption was within the temple system with the religious elite whose responsibility it was to care for their people, God's people. But in the time of Rome, the corruption was vast. We see that in Jesus' ministry. When Jesus starts His ministry, He spends at least a couple years with the Pharisees. And yeah, on occasion, they tried to find fault in Him. They would try to trick Him. They would try to, other things. He spends pretty much a week in Jerusalem with the Sadducees, and He's crucified. Just to show you how corrupt they were. A lot of times we beat up the Pharisees, but the Sadducees, I think, probably need more of a beating than anybody. They were very, very corrupt. The whole arrest and the trial of Jesus showed us that, proved that. Everything about the trial of Jesus was illegal. Now, I don't want to spend all morning on this, because we could. But I do want to bring up the Olivet Discourse, because that's going to matter as we move forward into Revelation 6. Matthew 24, Luke 19 and 21 actually, and Mark 13 all prophesy about a future event that is coming well within their lifetime, well within their generation, and Jesus makes that clear with the language He uses. I can't tell you how many times that I have seen the Olivet Discourse misused, taken out of context to fit something in our day and age. That is not what the text is showing us here. Now, again, I say that the persecution of Christians wasn't just from Rome. The people of the followers of Jesus were pretty much in the crossfire of Rome and the Jews. You can read the book of Acts to see just how much persecution was carried out on the apostles of Jesus. A lot of the apostles were actually killed by the Jews, or they were given up to Roman authority and killed by the Romans, but who tattled on them? Who gave them up? The Jews. James was actually one that he was taken up on top of the pinnacle of the temple. This would have been before the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, and he was thrown from it. Now, that's not in your Bible. I understand that. But the religious leaders felt that was his punishment. And when they threw him off the temple mount, the temple pinnacle, he survived, probably barely, and they clubbed him to death. It's terrible. Mark 12, I think, really sets the stage for Mark 13, which is the Olivet Discourse in Mark. Okay? I want you to follow along in this story with me, and I want you to see if anything stands out to you. Beginning in verse 1, Jesus began to speak to them in parables. A man planted a vineyard, and he put a wall around it, dug a pit for the winepress, and he built a watchtower. Then he rented the vineyard out to some farmers and moved to another place. At harvest time, he sent a servant to the tenants, or the farmers, to collect his share of the fruit. But they seized him, beat him, and sent him away empty-handed. Then he sent another servant. They struck this man on the head and treated him shamefully. Then he sent another, and that one they killed. He sent many others. Some of them they beat, some of them they killed. He had one left, a son, whom he loved. And he sent him last of all, saying, "They will respect my son." But the tenants said to one another, "This is the heir. Come, let us kill him, and the inheritance will be ours." So they took him, killed him, and threw him out of the vineyard. Then he asked the question to his apostles. He says, "What then will the owner of the vineyard do?" And it looks like before they have the chance to answer, he's going to answer the question. He will come and he will kill those servants, and he will give the vineyard to others. Haven't you read the scripture? We're going back to the Old Testament, okay? The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. The Lord has done this, and it is marvelous in our eyes. Now, verse 12 is key. The scripture says that the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the elders looked for a way to arrest him. Why? Because they knew that he had spoken the parable against them. They knew that they were the bad guys in the parable, and they hated it, and they hated Jesus for it. Luke 19, verses 41 through 44. As Jesus approached Jerusalem, this is the passage where he weeps as he approaches the city. He says, "For the days will come upon you, and your enemies will set up a barricade around you and surround you and hem you in on every side." That's military, that's a siege. That's siege language. "And they will tear you down to the ground, and your children with you, and they will not leave one stone upon another, because you did not know the time of your visitation." Matthew 24:34. "Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until these things take place." And the Greek language is going to matter here, because the Greek words that Jesus uses refers to their current day and age. The Greek word that he uses for this generation, is hutos, not ekonos. Ekonos means that. That's what you would be referring to if you were talking about a futuristic generation that is not living at the time. This is hutos that he uses. That describes a person or concept, a multitude of people within reach. Not out of reach. Not 3,000 years out of reach. Within reach. And generation is Gene, and that word actually means a multitude of like people living in a period of time. Now, God's judgment is coming. God's judgment is coming upon Israel. And it's coming soon. And it's coming within their lifetime. Keep all of this in mind as we study Revelation. Because Israel is not the only ones to be judged here. Rome will be judged too. Revelation makes that clear. But Israel is first. Okay? And I know that might be a hard one to take right now, but we're going to get into it. Don't worry. The judgment of Israel is for her abandonment and rejection of the Son of God. What the Jews understood about the temple, the sacrificial system, and all that was about it was about to change. Everything was about to turn upside down for the Jews. It doesn't help that the Jews scapegoated the Christians on occasion. No, all the time. And it didn't help that they were also sacrificing to God on behalf of Caesar of Rome. They did that to avoid Roman persecution. And under some Roman emperors, it was not as bad. And then some, there were a few that hated the Jews. But the Jews found opportunity that when it was time to put blame on someone, they were going to scapegoat the Christians. And this actually would happen, especially after the fire of Rome. Followers of Jesus at that time were seen as a sect of the Jews. Because at the early part of the pretty much the birth of the kingdom of Christ, pretty much from the early stages, they would actually worship and attend meetings in the synagogues. But eventually that started to stop. And those following the Messiah started to get abandoned by their Jewish brothers and sisters. Doors to the synagogues were shutting. Why do you think that Jesus makes it clear? He calls twice in the Revelation letter to these churches, he says there's a synagogue of Satan there. These Jews were not welcoming of their brothers and sisters. They were not loving of them. Because they only wanted to save their own hides in those cases. And we're going to read this here in just a moment that I've got posted. Just give me a moment. Jeremiah warned of the Jerusalem fall and the temple destruction when Babylon would siege and take the city in 586 BC. And he would use very similar language that Jesus uses in the Olivet Discourse. War, famine, strife, persecutions, disease, and decreation language. Decreation language. We're going to talk about that in just a moment. Now, let's go over something here. Before the Romans even came upon Jerusalem and laid siege to the city, there was a civil war breaking out within the city walls itself. There were actually 3 layers of walls within Jerusalem. I did not know that. And so when the Romans sieged Jerusalem, they at first just sieged the outside wall. And they had to basically fight their way in to a tighter wall formation, basically. So it's kind of wild if you read this. But anyway, when the Romans got there and sieged the city, you had 3 factions fighting each other. You had one faction led by Simon Bar Giora. He had a significant force of thousands of slaves and some zealots. He actually was in the lower part of the city. They had about 15,000 men. Then you had John of Gischala. Now he's going to be important in a moment. He actually had control of the Temple Mount. That was where the temple was, obviously. He had about 6,000 men, and he appointed the high priest at that time, Panias. Then you had Eleazar ben Simon. He controlled his own army of slave zealots and common laborers. It numbered about 2,400. So if you do the math, it doesn't add up very equal to Titus, the Roman general, and his legions, which were about 70,000. But let me tell you something. Though the Jews were outnumbered, this war was going to be one of the bloodiest wars that Rome would fight in one city. It was horrible. All three factions, when Titus came upon Jerusalem, now they had already done enough damage to themselves. They didn't help themselves at all. They had actually destroyed some of their own food bins during their civil war to get back at the other factions. Well, guess what? When the Romans laid siege to the city, eventually, where was their food? Famine was going to set in, and it was going to set in quick. And it was going to be terrible. Rome threw almost everything it had at the city of Jerusalem in regards to equipment and weaponry. And the Jews were not lightly armed. I mean, when we think of this moment in history, sometimes we think, oh, well, they didn't really have a lot. No, they had their own equipment that dealt a lot of damage to the Romans. And a lot of Romans would die in this war, in this siege. A lot. But so would a lot of Jews. And the city of Jerusalem would eventually fall. The Roman war with the Jews lasted close to 3.5 years. That's going to be important. The siege of Jerusalem lasted almost 7 months. A civil war, like I said, had already broken out inside the city against the three factions. Food storages, by the time the Romans got there, were burned up, and a severe famine was going to start very soon. No one really knows how many Jews were killed in the fighting. Tacitus, who was a Roman historian, estimates about 600,000 Jews were killed, where Josephus actually says that about 1 million were killed, both being Roman historians. Josephus having a Jewish background. I didn't know this either, but after basically when the siege happened, eventually you're going to run out of stuff. You're going to run out of supplies, you're going to run out of food, you're going to run out of clean water. And what's wild about the siege was when the Romans sieged Jerusalem, Jerusalem had like these big bodies of pools. The pool of Siloam, the pool of Bethsaida, and the Israel pool. They had 3 big ones. And so people could draw water from those. Well, when the Romans laid siege and it got summertime, the water dwindled out. And that was where everybody started to crave water. And another thing you're going to run out of is your animals for sacrifice. And it was during the siege, it was on August 5th of 70 AD, that the last sacrificial lamb was offered. While the Roman legions were already in the city, they had already broken through that first wall. They were actually at the walls of the Temple Mount. The Temple Mount had its own security. It had its own defenses. And when they got up to the city of the walls of the Temple Mount, it was within the next 25 days that the Temple Mount would fall, and the temple. This is artist imagery of just the chaos in the city, especially once the Romans. The Josephus would write about how when the Romans got into the city, there were bodies everywhere. I mean, a lot of people were just dead, laying in the streets, and the Romans were having to step over them or step on them to get from point to point. This is an artist's rendition of the Temple Mount. Like I said, the Temple Mount had its own security. It had its own walls and everything. But you can see the Romans just. And what's crazy is when you read the history, even the Roman historians will tell that when the Temple Mount, when the walls finally came down and they got into the temple, it was pure chaos. Even the Roman general Titus couldn't really control his men at that point. They were so frustrated with how many brothers they had already lost in the war. I mean, the Jews were relentless. I can't give them enough credit for how they fought. I mean, they fought tooth and nail to preserve everything that they believed. I mean, it was vicious. And so when the Romans finally were kind of within that victory state, it was chaos. And that's when everything started to burn. Soldiers were just lighting fires. They were plundering the temple before it was finally destroyed and burned to the ground. Now, let's talk about decreation language. This is something you see in the Olivet Discourse. It's something you see in Revelation. And it's actually something you'll see somewhere else in the Old Testament. Can't forget those books, right? So when we go back to the Old Testament, let's talk about that. So decreation language, I've got some points mentioned up here for you to read. It's nothing that the recipients of Revelation or the listeners of Jesus, even the apostles, would have been familiar with the language Jesus was using. It wasn't a mystery. To anyone knowing their Old Testament or the Tanakh, they would have understood it. The language was metaphorical in their day, and it was used to describe the doom and judgment of various nations with cosmic signs, destruction of the earth. Okay, and I put on there the sun being blotted out, the moon becoming like blood, stars falling from the heavens, mountains and hills collapsing, the sky vanishing or being rolled up like a scroll. That is nothing new outside of New Testament scriptures. If I could, I would like for someone to volunteer. If someone would like to read Isaiah 13, I'll give you the verses once you get there. It's just 3 verses. Isaiah 13, just raise your hand if you want to volunteer for that one. Okay. Dale, go ahead and turn there, Isaiah 13. And I'm actually going to have it on the screen for everybody to read, I think. Yes, okay. Let's see. You're going to read Isaiah 13 and you're going to read 10 through 13. You're going to read 3 verses.
This evil people who refuse to hear my words, who walk in the imagination of their heart and walk after other gods to serve them and worship them, will be just like this sash, which is profitable for nothing. Whereas the sash clings to the waist of a man, so I have caused the whole house of Israel and the whole house of Judah to cling to me, says the Lord, that they may become my people, for renown, for praise, and for glory, but they would not hear. Therefore you shall speak to them this word. Thus says the Lord God of Israel, every bottle shall be filled with wine, and they will say to you, do we not certainly know that every bottle will be filled with wine? Then you shall say to them, says the Lord, behold, I will fill all the inhabitants of this land, even the kings who sit on David's throne.
Hey Dale. Dale, I hate to interrupt you. Where are you at? Isaiah 13?
That was, verse 13. I'm sorry, I'm in Jeremiah.
I'm getting a lot of looks out there. That does not match the screen.
All right.
And I had to recheck. I'm like, surely okay, Isaiah 13.
I don't know what I saw. Let me start over. Can you erase that?
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, so Isaiah 13 and verses 10 through 13.
Here we go.
10 through 13.
For the stars of heaven and their constellations will not give their light. Does that sound better?
There you go. You're on it. Keep going. You're good now.
The sun will be darkened in its going forth, and the moon will not cause its light to shine. I will punish the world for its evil and the wicked for their iniquity. I will halt the arrogance of the proud and will lay low the haughtiness of the terrible. I will make a mortal more rare than fine gold, and more than the golden wave of Ophir. Therefore I will shake the heavens, and the earth will move out of her place. The wrath of the Lord of hosts, and the day of his fierce anger.
Thank you, Dale. So this is a prophecy dealing with the destruction of this is actually a prophecy dealing with God's judgment and destruction of Babylon. Okay? It wasn't that the world would come to an end. It was that Babylon would fall. and the rulers and the authority of Babylon would be gone. Okay? Due to God's judgment that he was raising up the Median armies to attack and to conquer them. Another one that I've got is Isaiah 34, verse 4. And all the host of heaven will fall away, the sky will be rolled up like a scroll, and their host will also wither away, as a leaf withers from the vine, and as one withers from the fig tree. This was actually about the judgment and destruction of the nation of Edom. Then you had Egypt's fall. Ezekiel 32, verses 7 and 8. When I extinguish you, I will cover the heavens and darken the stars. I will cover the sun with a cloud, the moon with its light. All the shining lights in the heavens will darken over you and will set darkness on your land. And that sounds very familiar to one of the plagues that would hit Egypt pre this time. This is outside of the slavery days of Israel, okay? Isaiah 51, verse 6. For the sky will vanish like smoke, and the earth will wear out like a garment, and its inhabitants will die in like manner. None of this language was new. It was not new to anyone listening to Jesus or reading John's letter. Now, Revelation 6, at the end of the New Testament, at the end of our New Testament Bible, you will see very similar language that we've read today. You will see earthquakes, the sun becoming black, the moon becoming like blood, stars falling to the earth. Chapter 8 declares that a large fiery mountain was cast into the sea, and a third of the sea became blood as a result. Critics of that thought say, well, these are all physical anomalies that can really happen. It sounds like comets, asteroids, eclipses, and other things like the earth, actual earthquakes and so on. But you must understand that's not what John is aiming for. That's not what Jesus was aiming for. He's not talking about futuristic cosmic events that are going to impact an audience 2,000 plus years in the future. The sky being rolled up like a scroll detailed the amount of destruction that was coming upon Edom. But it's describing how God's judgment is going to be on that specific nation and how vast and how powerful it will be. The sky being rolled up like a scroll is also in Revelation 6. Now, there is much debate as to when Revelation was written, and we've not really talked about that a whole lot. Whether when you look at it, you got two camps to this. You've got 60s AD, this would have been during the time of Nero. And then the other alternative is 90s AD. This would have been during the time of Domitian. It's no mystery that both men were wicked. Both men were persecutory towards the Christians. What's wild about Nero is when he became an emperor at a very young age, he was actually a decent emperor. But mainly because his mother was ruling through him. But eventually that ends because he has his mother executed. Then he kills both of his wives, one of them being pregnant with his child. But they were not his only victims of his bloodthirsty rage. Many Christians would be blamed and killed because when the fire of Rome broke out and burned the city for 9 days straight, rumors started to spread that Nero was the culprit. And so in order to cast the blame on someone else, he cast it on what was known as the sect at that time, or the believers of the Messiah. He actually believed himself to be Apollo incarnate. Apollo was the son of which god? You remember in our culture study? Zeus. So Apollo would be the son of God in that instance. Nero felt himself to be Apollo. He actually was so obsessed with it that he had a crown made for himself that had spikes coming from it that made it look like rays were shining from his sun, from his face. After the fire of Rome, he conveniently had plans to rebuild the city, and rebuilding the city somehow or another involved building his huge palatial compound called the Golden House. This is where he would erect a 90-foot statue of himself made of bronze with the ray crown on his head. It was actually so big of a statue, it was actually bigger than Domitian's that he had built about himself. His was about 50 foot tall. It was so large that when Nero died, the people didn't want to tear it down. They just simply renamed it. And the Colosseum was eventually built next to it. And so it became the Colossus of the Colosseum. And so anybody that was coming to the Olympic Games or whatever, you would have seen this huge 90 to 100-foot statue above you. And I've put on there the picture just to show you kind of the people, just how huge the statue was. It was believed that an earthquake actually eventually destroyed the statue in the 4th century AD. So it lasted for a while. But Nero and Domitian were both interestingly, and one would say maybe coincidentally, labeled as beast of the people because of their bloodthirsty lust. Now, when we start reading chapter 6 and we get introduced to the 4 riders, let's keep all this in mind. Okay? In verses 1 and 2, I watched as the Lamb opened the first of the 7 seals. Then I heard one of the 4 living creatures say in a voice like thunder, "Come." I looked, and there before me was a white horse. Its rider held a bow, and he was given a crown, and he rode out as a conqueror, bent on conquest. That was actually where we ended our lesson last time. Does anybody have anything they would like to add as to their thoughts on this rider? And I would greatly encourage, don't look at your commentary. Think for yourself. Who does this sound like to you?
Like a Christ figure.
Sounds like a Christ figure, okay?
Doesn't really fit with the rest of what's fixing to happen.
Any other thoughts? Would someone like to volunteer to read, I'm going to say this, Habakkuk? I know that's not correct, but whatever. Habakkuk? Anybody want to volunteer to read something from there? Anybody? Raise your hand if you want to volunteer. But if everybody raises their hand at once, we can't do that. Dale got in trouble, so he's in timeout. He's not allowed to read him, and I'm just kidding. All right, who wants to read Habakkuk chapter 3, verses 8 through 15? Anybody like to read that? Anybody at all? What's that? Habakkuk chapter 3. Are you volunteering? Okay. You asked, so I just want to make sure. Start in verse 8, and you're going to read 8 through 15, okay?
Were you angry with the rivers, Lord? Was your wrath against the streams? Did you rage against the sea when you rode your horses and your chariots to victory? You uncovered their bow, you called for many arrows, you split the earth with rivers, the mountains you saw, and with it, torrents of water swept by, the deep roared, the waters of its waves on high. Sun and moon stood still in the heavens at the glint of your fiery arrows, at the the lightning of your flashing spear. In wrath you strode through the earth, in anger you threshed the nations. You came out to deliver your people, to save your anointed one, to crush the leaders of the land of the wickedness. You stripped him from head to foot.
Verse 15.
With your spear you pierced his head when his warriors stormed out to shatter us, floating as though to devour the wicked, the wretched who were in hiding. You trampled the sea with your horses, turning the great waters.
Thank you. And there's a lot more to that. You could, honestly, if you read the whole chapter, I mean, it all fits, but obviously for time, we wanted to kind of shorten that. So what similarities do you see between this writer and Habakkuk chapter 3? What are the similarities you see? Habakkuk chapter 3 is God coming in judgment. Earlier in that chapter, it says he's shining like the sun. Now, I think that's interesting because Nero thought of himself this way. Flashing with lightning, bringing pestilence and plague, shattering mountains, collapsing hills. There's your decreation language. Riding on horseback, there's your horses. Armed with a bow, there's your bow. And the bow is out. He's using it. He's firing arrows. This bow is not in its holster. The bow is out. It's equipped by the rider on the first horse. It's being used. Extinguishing the sun and moon, more decreation language. Trampling the nations in fury. The prophet Habakkuk clearly interprets his imagery in the text as a prophecy of what's coming to Judah, to Jerusalem, and that was the Babylonian invasion in 586. You see the writer in the passage is wearing a victor's crown. That in the Greek, that's Stephanos. That word is mentioned 7 times in Revelation. The crown tells us that the writer is already victorious in something, but he's got more to conquer. His victorious reign is not over yet. The Greek word that's used for conquer comes from the same one that means overcome, which is used by John in Revelation 5:5 and other passages. And in that passage, he's talking about those who overcome in the church in Laodicea. And you know, obviously there will be a reward for those who overcome. That same word is conquer. Jeremiah chapter 4. Or actually, let's see. Yeah. Psalm 45. Write that one down. Read that one later. It goes right in hand with Revelation 6 and Habakkuk 3. Jeremiah 4, verses 13 through 14, describe God's judgment coming on Israel through the Babylonians in very similar language of the Olivet Discourse. Listen to these words, verses 13 and 14 of Jeremiah 4. It's Old Testament, okay? Behold, he shall come on the clouds, and his chariots will be like a whirlwind. His horses faster than eagles. Woe to us, for we are ruined. When Assyria was coming to attack Egypt, Isaiah prophesied in chapter 19, verse 1, the Lord rides on a swift cloud and shall come into Egypt, and the idols of Egypt will tremble before him, and the hearts of the Egyptians will melt with fear. If you go back to the Olivet Discourse, Jesus describes himself coming on the clouds. It was language referring to swift and vast judgment coming upon a nation. There's so much more that we could say on that. And we could go over the historical text outside the Bible. We read some from Josephus and Tacitus. I mean, there's so many others, as well as other historians who witnessed these events pan out. Even Titus, the Roman general who led the siege on Jerusalem, believed in some respects that the Jewish God had pretty much led him to the city. He actually claimed to also have killed the Jewish God, which when he destroyed the temple, but obviously that was wrong. It's 9:47. And so the next rider that we are going to be looking at in our next study is going to be the rider on the red horse. So I encourage you to continue to read chapter 6. The next time I'm with you, we're probably not going to finish going over the 4 riders, and I'm just being honest with you. I think I've got like 8 pages of notes and then 30 slides. So, we've went through, we're still in introduction. No, I'm just kidding. But I do have a lot more, so I don't want to speed ahead because I want us to kind of grasp what's going on here. And there's a lot. There's a lot going on. I get it. When we read this, we're like, our brains just feel like it's in a washing machine or something, just going crazy. But, it gets more and more interesting. If it hasn't already, it's going to get more and more interesting as we study these other riders. So we went over the rider on the white horse. If you want to study that on your own, of course, I'd encourage you to do that. And then maybe you can get some ideas on what you see. There's actually more references there than what we went over. We went over just a few of the text, but there's actually, I think, Psalm 46, Hosea 13, I believe, and there's actually one more. I'm trying to think where it's at, but there's so many passages that John is linking up to. It's like having it's like John just had his own little footnotes. He's just attaching to the letter. So again, keep in mind this language is understood by the early Christians here. They understood the language, especially those who were of Jewish heritage. They would have known their Torah. They would have known the entire Old Testament, some of them. And so a lot of them would have had it memorized to where all John had to do was say a couple words and they knew what he was talking about. And they probably understood the context because they understood what was before that and what was after that passage that he quoted. So anyway, so we're going to pick up with the red horse and its rider. And we're about to have a flood of people coming in, it looks like. Everybody's coming in. So thank you for your attention. If you have any thoughts you want to share with me after class, feel free to do so. Thank you very much.